My name is Sophia Reynolds, and I am 35 years old. Family has always felt like this fragile thing to me, something you hold carefully because one wrong move and it cracks right down the middle. I used to believe that if I just stayed quiet and kept the peace, the cracks would eventually smooth over on their own. That belief nearly cost me everything during what was supposed to be a simple winter getaway to a rented cabin in the Virginia countryside. It started on a gray Tuesday afternoon in early December. I was in our small home office half packed for the annual family trip when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ethan, my husband, was still at work, and we didn't usually get drop ins on weekdays. When I opened the door, Laura Simmons stood there snow dusting her coat, looking like she had driven straight from the cabin without stopping. Laura had been Ethan's childhood friend and had stayed in touch with the whole family over the years. She managed bookings for several retreats in the area, which was why she sometimes popped in early to check on things. "Sophia, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and urgent. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, closing the door behind her like she was shutting out the cold and something heavier. I offered her coffee, but she shook her head and sat on the edge of the couch like she might need to leave again any second. "I was at the cabin yesterday prepping for your group," Laura began. "Helen and Ethan arrived a day early. They didn't know I was still there in the back office. I heard them talking." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They were planning something for the big family dinner on Friday night. It wasn't just catching up or toasts. Helen kept saying it was time to put you in your place in front of everyone. Ethan agreed. They talked about how you always make things about yourself and how the rest of the family needs to see that you're the problem. They even practice lines praising Claire and the others while pointing out everything you do wrong. It sounded like they wanted to corner you into agreeing to, I don't know, step back from your career or stop influencing Ethan. They called it a family intervention, but it felt like a setup." My stomach dropped. The room tilted for a second, the way it does when you realize the ground you've been standing on was never solid. Helen, my mother-in-law, had always been sharp with me. Little comments about how I worked too much or how Ethan deserved someone more family-oriented. I had brushed it off for years, telling myself it was just her way, that staying quiet would eventually earn her respect. Ethan usually stayed neutral, sometimes even defending me in private, but never in front of her. Now it sounded like they had formed their own quiet pact to sideline me completely. I thanked Laura, my voice sounding far away, even to me. She left after making me promise to be careful. The moment the door closed, I sat down hard on the kitchen stool. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app for the cabin. We had installed the system 2 winters ago after a break-in scare at one of the other rentals. The cameras were motion activated and cloud connected. I scrolled back to the previous afternoon. There they were, Helen and Ethan in the main living room, voices clear through the speakers. Helen was laughing in that light social way she used around other people. "She'll be so surprised when everyone starts speaking up," she said. "We've all been too nice for too long. Sophia needs to understand she's not the center of this family." Ethan nodded, rubbing the back of his neck the way he does when he's uncomfortable, but going along anyway. She always has to have the last word on everything. It's exhausting. Friday night, we fix it. They went on like that for 20 minutes, listing examples of my supposed selfishness, things as small as suggesting a different restaurant or asking for quiet time after long workdays. Every time Helen praised Claire, Ethan's sister, or talked about how easy the rest of the family was, it landed like a small cut. I watched the footage 3 times. Each time the chaotic feeling inside me grew louder: anger, hurt, disbelief, and this cold, sharp clarity that had been missing for years. Staying quiet hadn't kept the peace. It had just given them more room to plan. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't call Helen. Instead, I called Claire. She and I had always had a decent, if distant, relationship. She answered on the second ring, sounding surprised but friendly. When I told her what I had heard and seen, there was a long silence on her end. "Sophia?" "I don't know what to say," she finally answered. Mom has been on edge about you for months. She thinks you're pulling Ethan away from family stuff, but this, planning it like that in front of everyone, that's not okay. I'll be there Friday. I won't let them blindside you." Her support felt like the first steady thing I had touched in hours. I thanked her and hung up. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Helen's voice from the recording light and reasonable talking about tearing me down in front of the people I had tried so hard to belong with. The next morning, I drove to the cabin alone, arriving before anyone else. The Virginia countryside was blanketed in fresh snow, the pine trees heavy and quiet. The cabin itself looked peaceful from the outside, log walls, wide porch smoke curling from the chimney where the caretaker had started the fire. Inside it felt different. I walked through the rooms, checking the cameras, making sure everything was still recording. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I only knew I wasn't going to walk into Friday night blind. That afternoon, Ethan arrived. He kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong and asked how the drive had been. I studied his face, looking for any sign that he felt guilty about what I had overheard. He just looked tired and a little distracted the way he always did when Helen was around. We made small talk about work and the weather while I tried to decide whether to confront him now or wait. The chaotic part of me wanted to scream the recording at him. The quieter part, the one that had kept the peace for so long, whispered that maybe there was still a way to fix this without burning everything down. I chose to wait, but I also chose to stop being invisible. Later that evening, while Ethan was on a call in the bedroom, I sat in the living room with the fire crackling and pulled up the camera footage again on my phone. I saved a copy to a private folder and backed it up, just in case. Then I texted Laura to thank her again and asked if she could keep an eye on the property feed from her end, too. She replied with a simple heart and the words, "You're not alone in this." I didn't feel alone exactly. I felt something sharper awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The cycle of staying quiet, of hoping my silence would eventually earn me a seat at the table, had kept me small. Helen and Ethan had counted on that silence. They had built their plan around it. Friday was coming fast. The rest of the family would arrive tomorrow, Claire, a few cousins, and Helen. The dinner was already planned, the table set in my mind with all the little ways they would try to shrink me in front of everyone. I didn't know yet how I would respond when it happened. I only knew I wasn't going to let them do it without the truth sitting right there in the room with us. Some lessons arrive like a quiet knock at the door. Others come crashing in wearing the face of someone you trusted. Either way, once you hear them, you can't unhear them, and I was done pretending the sound wasn't real. The next morning, the cabin felt even quieter with just Ethan and me, but the silence was loud with everything I wasn't saying. I kept the saved footage on my phone like a loaded question I wasn't ready to ask yet. Every time he smiled at me over coffee, I felt the ground tilt a little more. Ethan spent most of the morning on calls for work, pacing the porch while I stayed inside pretending to read. Around noon, he came back in, rubbing his hands together against the cold. "Mom should be here in a couple of hours," he said casually, like it was just another family trip. "Claire texted she's bringing that wine you like." He paused, studying me. "You okay? You seem off since yesterday." I forced a small smile even though my chest felt tight. Just tired from the drive and thinking about the dinner tomorrow. That was true enough. I was thinking about it constantly, the way Helen's voice had sounded on the recording light, and reasonable while she listed all the ways I apparently made everything harder for everyone. Ethan nodded, relieved I wasn't pushing. He kissed the top of my head and went back to his laptop. The easy way he moved through the day made the chaos inside me worse. How could he act like nothing had changed when he had sat in that living room and agreed to corner me? I slipped away to the small bedroom we were using and opened the camera app again. The system had caught more movement overnight. Helen must have arrived even earlier than Ethan thought. I watched the new clip. She was in the kitchen with Ethan at dawn, both of them speaking in low voices while the snow fell outside the big windows. Helen was smiling that same social smile, We have to be united on this, she said, pouring coffee. Sophia has this way of making every conversation about her feelings. It's exhausting for the rest of us. Friday night, we all say it out loud so she finally hears it. Claire will back us up. She knows how much easier things are when Sophia isn't steering everything. Ethan had nodded again slower this time. She'll be upset, but it's for the best. She needs to see she's not the only one who matters here. My hands went cold. They were planning to use Claire as part of the pressure. The same Claire who had promised on the phone she wouldn't let them blindside me. I saved that clip too and sent a quick text to Laura more footage. It's worse than I thought. She replied almost instantly. I'm nearby if you need me. Mrs. Patterson from the next property saw them talking on the porch this morning, too. She said Helen looked pleased with herself. Mrs. Patterson was the older woman who lived year-round in the cabin 2 properties over. She sometimes helped with snow removal and knew the families who rented here. I hadn't met her yet this trip, but the fact that even a neighbor had noticed something off made the whole thing feel more real and more isolating at the same time. By the time Helen's car pulled into the driveway that afternoon, my stomach was in knots. She came in carrying a tote bag of groceries like she owned the place, cheeks pink from the cold, already talking. Ethan, sweetheart, you look tired. Sophia, you should have started the fire earlier. The house feels damp. She set the bag down and looked around the kitchen like she was taking inventory. I brought the good roast for tomorrow. We need something special if we're going to have a real conversation as a family. The word conversation landed like a stone. I kept my voice even. That's thoughtful of you. Helen gave me one of her thin smiles, the kind that never reached her eyes, and turned to Ethan. See, she's already on edge. We haven't even started, and she's making it about herself. She said it lightly like a joke, but the way Ethan's shoulders tightened told me he heard the edge underneath. The rest of the afternoon was a slow tightening. Helen moved through the cabin, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, commenting on how I had folded the towels too neatly like we're in a hotel, and how the groceries I had bought were a little extravagant for a simple family weekend. Every time she praised Ethan or mentioned how easy Claire was to be around, it felt deliberate. Ethan didn't correct her. He just gave me these small apologetic looks when she wasn't watching, like he wanted credit for not joining in, but not enough to actually stop it. I escaped to the porch for a few minutes of cold air and texted Claire again. Your mom is here. She's already starting. Claire replied quickly. I'm 2 hours out. Don't let her get to you. We'll talk when I arrive. The "will talk" felt like a thin thread I was clinging to. I didn't know yet if Claire would actually stand with me, or if she had been pulled into the plan without realizing how far it went. That evening, Helen cooked while Ethan helped and I set the table. She kept up a running commentary aimed at no one in particular, but clearly meant for me. Some people just can't let things be simple. They always have to add their own twists, their own opinions. It wears everyone else down eventually. Ethan stayed quiet. I stayed quiet too, but inside everything was loud memories of other dinners, other comments, years of swallowing the same pattern. Because speaking up had always felt like it would make me the problem. After dinner, Helen went to bed early, claiming the drive had tired her. Ethan and I stayed up by the fire. He reached for my hand. Mom means well. She just worries about us. His voice was gentle, but it still felt like he was asking me to agree that I was the one making things difficult. I looked at him for a long moment, the man I had married, because he felt steady when everything else wasn't. Do you really believe that I asked quietly? He didn't answer right away. The fire popped. Outside, the wind picked up against the windows. I think she's old-fashioned, he finally said, and I think you and her just see things differently sometimes. He squeezed my hand like that settled it. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. The distance between us felt wider than the room. I waited until he fell asleep before I checked the cameras one more time. There was a new clip from earlier that evening, Helen on the phone and the guest room door cracked. She was talking to someone, probably one of the cousins who was driving up tomorrow. Just be ready to speak up if she starts her usual thing, Helen said, her voice low but clear. We're doing this for Ethan. He deserves a wife who puts family first, not her job or her feelings. Friday night, we make sure she understands that." She laughed softly. "It'll be good for her in the long run." I closed the app and sat in the dark living room for a long time, the phone heavy in my hands. The plan wasn't just words anymore. It had a time, a place, an audience, and they were counting on me to do what I had always done: stay quiet, absorb it, keep the peace so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. The chaotic part of me wanted to wake Ethan up and play every clip right then. The steadier part, the one that had learned to think before reacting, told me to wait. Let them set the stage. Let them think I was still the same person who would shrink to make room for everyone else's comfort. Because if I was going to break the cycle, I needed them to show exactly who they were when they thought no one was watching. Claire was due in the morning. Mrs. Patterson had apparently mentioned to Laura that she might stop by with extra firewood. The house was filling up with people who didn't know what I knew, and tomorrow night the dinner would happen whether I was ready or not. I lay down next to Ethan, but didn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same questions. How far would Helen push it? Would Ethan finally choose a side out loud? And what would it cost me if I finally stopped being the one who stayed quiet? The wind outside had turned sharp. It sounded like the whole cabin was holding its breath. The morning Claire arrived, the cabin felt like it was holding its breath. She came in with a bag over her shoulder and a careful smile, hugging Ethan first, then turning to me. "Rough night?" she asked quietly while Helen was in the kitchen. I nodded once. She squeezed my arm. "I'm here. We'll get through dinner." Helen spent the day in full hosting mode, directing everyone who arrived, 2 cousins and an aunt, while making sure every comment circled back to how some people complicated family time. Ethan stayed close to her, laughing at her jokes a little too loudly. I kept to the Edge's phone in my pocket with the save clips ready. Mrs. Patterson stopped by mid-afternoon with extra firewood and stayed for coffee. She gave me a long look when Helen wasn't watching and said, "You hold your ground, dear. Some conversations need daylight." Then she left and the house felt smaller again. By the time we sat down for dinner, the table was full. Roast potatoes, the wine Claire had brought. Helen had placed me at the far end away from Ethan. She waited until everyone had food on their plates before she tapped her glass. "I think it's time we had an honest talk as a family," she said, voice warm, like she was about to give a toast. "We've all been walking on eggshells for too long. Sophia, sweetheart, we love you. But you make everything so difficult. You always have an opinion. You always need things your way. Look at Ethan, he's exhausted trying to keep up with your career and your feelings. The rest of us just want peace." She went around the table with examples praising Claire for being easy, the cousins for showing up without drama, even Ethan for putting up with so much. Every sentence landed exactly where the recordings had promised. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Inside the chaos was loud, old memories of other dinners, years of swallowing the same pattern, but I kept my face still. Ethan shifted in his chair but didn't speak. Claire stared at her plate. One cousin looked uncomfortable. Helen kept going, building to the point. "We're doing this because we care. We want you to see that putting family first means stepping back sometimes. Your job, your need to control every plan, it's hurting all of us." The table went quiet. Helen looked at me expectantly, like she had handed me a script and was waiting for me to read my lines of apology. I took out my phone. Before anyone answers, that I said, keeping my voice even, "There's something you should all hear." I connected to the Bluetooth speaker on the side table and played the first clip, the one from the living room where Helen and Ethan had planned the intervention. Her own voice filled the room, light and reasonable, talking about putting me in my place. Then the kitchen clip where she said I made everything about myself. Then the phone call where she told a cousin to be ready to speak up. The color drained from Helen's face. Ethan went very still. Claire's eyes widened. The cousins shifted, looking between us like they had walked into the wrong house. Helen recovered first. That's private. You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "You planned this in a house with cameras. You counted on me staying quiet like I always have. Staying quiet is what let this go on for years." Claire stood up. Her chair scraped the floor. Mom, stop. This is wrong. You sat in my kitchen last month and told me Sophia was difficult and that Ethan needed our help managing her. I thought you meant supporting them. Not this. She looked at Ethan. And you went along with it? You let her plan to humiliate your wife in front of everyone. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time, he looked at me instead of his mother. Sophia, I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted things to be easier. Easier for who I asked. The question hung there. He didn't have an answer. Helen tried again, voice rising. You're twisting everything. We were trying to help. You're too sensitive. You always have been. I stood up slowly. I'm sensitive enough to know when I'm being set up, and I'm done making myself smaller so the rest of you can feel comfortable. I looked around the table. I'm not asking anyone to choose sides. I'm just done pretending this is love. I walked to the bedroom, packed my bag in 10 minutes, and came back out. Mrs. Patterson must have been watching from her porch because her truck lights were already on when I stepped outside. She drove me to the small inn down the road without asking questions. I texted Ethan once I need space. We'll talk when I'm ready. He didn't reply that night. The next morning, Claire showed up at the inn with coffee and red eyes. I told Mom I won't be at any more family things if she keeps doing this. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. She hugged me hard. It was the first real support I had felt in years, and it came at a cost I hadn't expected. Over the following weeks, the invitations stopped. No more group texts about holidays. No more the cabin is booked for February. Ethan moved between our house and his mother's, trying to find a middle ground that didn't exist. We separated 6 months later. He kept saying he loved me but couldn't choose between his wife and the family he had always known. I chose myself anyway. The ironic part arrived quietly. Helen's big intervention backfired so completely that even the cousins started pulling away from her. She had wanted to shrink me in front of everyone. Instead, she showed them exactly how small she needed everyone else to stay. But the price was real. I lost the automatic belonging, the easy. Of course you're coming that had defined holidays for a decade. Some days that loss still aches. Other days it feels like the cleanest thing I ever did. I still have the recordings. I don't play them anymore. I don't need to. The lesson settled in slowly, the way winter light changes a room without anyone noticing until the shadows are gone. Staying quiet had kept the cycle spinning. Speaking up even calmly with evidence instead of screaming broke it. It cost me the version of family I had tried so hard to protect. It gave me back the version of myself I had almost lost. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever stayed quiet because the alternative felt too expensive, I see you. What would you have done when the recording started playing?